Keep your eyes open. Hey everybody, welcome. Take a real good look at everything you found. Take your life. Till they come, oh, it'll be gone soon. Take a little time for howling at the moon. Take a little time for sunshine. Take a whole lot of time for love. Take time for crazy things. Have a little love above. Gotta make music. Raise your voice with you. You got a lot to do. You got a lifetime to stay.
Yeah.
Like we're out on boats. We need to have somewhere.
My life from day to day, but seems a lot of never leave me straight. Never saw. I love this song. That hard to me, take a little time. Okay. That was Beethoven's Sixth Symphony and Howlin' at the Moon by Sam Bush. I heard this song in Denver last year for the first time. We're back in Denver. There's a Colonel dinner tonight. I think about 60 people are there on the RSVP list. It's more people than we have in Fireside today, but we have it recorded. And we're really grateful for the small and I'm sure meaningful group for this week's call. We have Akshat from KB8 who's going to help us with an introduction to the history of scaling Ethereum, and then Zain from Optimism, who is also in KB5, and I think will be a really good partner in understanding just where we are in that specific story. It is the module scaling principle games. I'll get through a bit of housekeeping before we get to both Akshat and then introducing Zain. We are in week 6, technically, which is the 7th week of kernel. So module 6, the 7th week, the 2 module topics are censorship resistance and learning how to learn, which both tie into the overall module of the week, which is called scaling principled games. So scaling principled games came up as a topic when the kernel syllabus was being written. Ethereum 2.0 was still an idea. It was a design spec, and you can see the original design spec in the syllabus. Of course, since then, Ethereum 2.0 shipped, and a lot of other things went live. You had Optimism, you have a long story there. But before we get into that story, we just try to remember, well, where did a lot of the ideas from Ethereum start? One of them was about the ability to resist censorship economically, to find new incentives that make it harder for power structures to, in large part, control our time. And so if that was one of the ideals, one of the questions is, how do we, number one, continue to further that as we are now 10 years into the story of crypto? And how do we use our time? And one of the responses is learn how to love learning. This is kernel, so there's a bias, I think, implicit, but there is something that we think is quite generative about that idea, because learning and encouraging ecologies of learning as a response to what we can do with censorship or with less censored spaces is we think an interesting suggestion. So that's where we stand in the syllabus. Where we stand in kernel is that we're in the second to last week. Next week's going to be showcase. We have, I know some people here who are presenting. I know some people who have been a bit on the fence. You're still welcome to RSVP. This is the last day. If you do want to RSVP, we would love for you to come as a guest, even if you don't want to participate. I think anyone who is would love to see you there, because it'll be the last kind of big sharing of adventures in this block. But the most important event, if you can only make one next week, is definitely the block party. It's the last day of the block, March 8th. March 8th is Friday, and Mariana, she works at Bonfire, and she's in this block. She's hosting an open mic. And the idea for block party is always just kind of like sharing any stories that have been meaningful to you over the last 8 weeks. They can be kernel related if there are stories of people that you've met, things that have happened, and we really would love to hear them and put them all on kind of like a shared artifact together. But Mariana, in this case, is also hosting kind of this open mic where you can share in a variety of formats. So there'll be an option for the open mic, but in general, it'll just kind of be um, one last call during KB8 to be together. Um, but the story goes on. We're in KB8, and Kernel Block 9 will be a little while from now, but the path begins pretty much now. At apply.kernel.community, the link for Kernel Block 9 has gone live as of today. It'll start July 8th. It'll go through September 6th. And if you know anyone who you think might be a good fit, the best thing that you could do is send it to them and continue the story. We know that each of you, we're really grateful to spend time with, and the best way, in large part, we can continue to spend time together is through others and through continued learning. So the block ends, March 8th, but that in between period from March 8th to July 8th, there'll be a lot of things happening within like an inter-block context, and we'll get into that as the time comes. But we're really excited about that, and yeah, we're looking forward. So I'll get into it with a bit of an introduction, but I want to get it to Akshat and Zain sooner than later. I already talked a little bit about censorship resistance, but just to bring some of the ideas that have grounded the story of both Bitcoin and Ethereum and continue to be a part of the narrative of what it is that we're trying to do is the idea that building on chain as a paradigm allows us freedom from economic power structures that we previously have had, basically, that have had more power over our movement, especially on the internet. And the question then says, it says the existence of any kind of power structure influences what truths can be thought in the first place. How can we free ourselves from this constraint? When the incentives which define the structure of power in society can be programmed, censorship resistance becomes an engineering problem, not an ideological one. Don't fight the system, just abandon it. We can literally engineer more expressive solutions. So this is part of the narrative, and it's a part of the ongoing work of crypto, is to say, well, can we design economic spaces that are different and more unique in some capacity than the previous economic systems? Can we use those as a way to incentivize learning is one thing that we suggest, but incentivize a different type of being online and definitely also in person, just with each other. So that is the nature of the problem that I think the overall movement has to measure itself against, is, are the new economic incentives that we are opting into providing us a different type of substrate than the previous container that we have? So that's a question that we can always come back as a group. The suggestion on learning how to learn is really simple. I actually want to just share this section on practice. It says, learning how to learn is not something you can learn about. You have to let it happen by being constantly aware. The rest is practice, 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 until you realize that what you most wanted to know was here all along, right with you. And all the work and struggle and acquisition and desire and practice was letting go to just bring you back into this moment right now. There's nothing else to learn about, nothing more to know. And I think that it's really a nice reminder that through the practice, you get more in tune with the moment that you're in. And in that moment, you have the choice to respond and to learn from it in any way that takes place. I can share a brief story with Zain. We were just together on a trip to a national park in Texas, and we had a really wonderful hike that was an 8-hour hike. And I just remember on the hike, just like walking, right? It's like a lot of walking. It's one step after another step after another step after another step, and you're feeling it in your body every step. For me, at least, I would feel it a little bit differently in my feet. There would be steps that I would feel a little bit of pain on the left side of my foot, and I'd have to readjust so that the next step might be a little bit different. And I think that like sharing what you feel and learning with other people is the type of thing that we hope uh, can be more cultivated if we create these new types of economic spaces. So I'll leave it at that. We can always come back to it. I want to get into Akshat's slides, which are really a very practical set of slides about what has happened as it relates to scaling Ethereum, which is supposed to be this censorship-resistant global world computer, which, is in its growth phase. And the game that Ethereum is based on has changed. When we started in Ethereum 1.0, it was a specific type of game and it was a principled game, but it was a game that didn't scale. So if there's scaling a principled game, then there was another layer to it. There was Ethereum 2.0, and there were a lot of things that happened along the way as basically a group of researchers were trying to scale this principled game to be better and better and better and maintain its censorship resistance qualities and characteristics so that we could build on top of it more freely. So I think I want to cede the screen sharing duties to Akshat for a few slides, just so you have it. Akshat, if that's good with you, and then I think that'll lead us well into Zain, who will maybe have some thoughts on that history and where we are with it today. Akshat, is that good for you, or do you want me to share? You're good. Okay.
Yeah, I can. Okay. So we obviously talked about a bunch of things about scaling and censorship. So I wanted to talk about how did we get here, and more importantly, why did we get here? And one of the core aspects of Ethereum is that nobody actually knew what Ethereum was going to be early on. Also, I realized I didn't actually introduce myself. I'm Akshat. You might have seen me around in KB8. I run Metacrypt, which is the Web3 agency. I work with multiple protocols, including Reserve. You might have also seen me around with a bunch of different foundations. So just as a preface, okay, back to the actual topics. So yeah, that fact about Ethereum gas limit being 5,000, that's actually very important because as you would realize that did nobody think that the base gas required for a transaction was 21K, but the block gas limit was only 5,000? How did that happen? And most of the time, it just attributed to the fact that that's why Ethereum was so new, that nobody actually knew what to exactly do with it. And early on, the blocks were so small and so important to get the chain working that it wasn't important to what exactly works. So you might have seen this thing before. Vitalik has shared this a few times, and I don't want to talk about it. Maybe because, as far as I can tell, for most people, this means absolutely nothing. I know this has a bunch of complicated words, and I know that maybe half of you can probably understand them, but most of you, no idea what they are, don't care what they exactly do. So let's just go past it. There is no reason to talk about that. So yeah, let's first talk about how did we get here. So Ethereum was never meant to be this global economic phenomena. It was just a side project that Vitalik was working on. Be like, okay, that sounds interesting. What if we added programmability to economy? And in the early days, the main focus was to actually get it to work because it was really hard to get it to work. It used to crash so often, it used to break so often. You'd be surprised how many blocks went by before the first transaction happened. And with Bitcoin, it was pretty much set that proof of work was the right way to start with. And that's why Ethereum began. But proof of stake was always going to be the goal. Like we want proof of like stake in some way or form for Ethereum to be able to scale beyond a certain point. And one of the things that started being the problem was gas prices, because nobody exactly knew how to price a block. The gas prices were always so high that you would just not be able to use the chain. So there had to be an economy between people who want gas, people who have gas, to be able to use them. And that's where EIP 1559 came in. And then around that time, people also realized that, okay, maybe just scaling Ethereum is not the right answer. We need more layers on top of that to be able to do something. And that's where the core growth and scaling factor changed from Ethereum itself to rollups. As soon as POS went live, it was obvious that rollups are going to be the obvious way to scale, because there is no way you can actually make Ethereum go from like a few hundred transactions to million plus over a course of time. So what exactly are we doing right now to actually make that happen? Well, there are multiple different things that the Ethereum team is like focused on what they want to do. Half of them are about scaling, and the other half are about censorship. And that's why it's so important to think about why we are talking about this right now. Some of these things, like dank sharding, are about including data that's not supposed to be executable on chain. And that's where blobs coming, and that's why OPStack, Arbitrum Orbit, all of them are like doing this right now, where you can push data on Ethereum as blobs instead of transactions. And that's important because they're much cheaper, and that just improves scalability on rollups by a lot. You'll see that I've mentioned a few other things, like how do you scale data as well. And that's where the concept of being able to transmit data between nodes comes in. Because if you have a lot of data, you also need to be able to transmit a lot of data. That's one aspect of what's been going on right now. You'll also see EPVS and liquid staking, and that's the main thing that's happening right now around censorship. Censorship didn't quite exist on Ethereum until like a few years ago, mainly because nobody figured out how you can use MEV essentially to extract additional value and not include transactions in blocks. Early on, the main problem was, can I include most transaction in this block by gas fees or not? So this new concept of censorship also made so that people who were building blocks and who were producing blocks weren't supposed to be the same people, otherwise it becomes a problem. And that's where EPVS comes in. Liquid staking, I'm sure I don't need to talk about it. We all know how centralized Lido, Rocket Pool are, and what they exactly what the problem with them is. And Vorkal and Snark are right now basically just buzzwords on what we exactly expected. There is one key differentiation here, and that's Ethereum is focused on being able to run it properly, being able to go beyond with just Ethereum without spending too much effort, while rollups are focused on how do you scale from that aspect and how to get users on chain. So I didn't talk about censorship a lot. I mentioned it a few times, but I really didn't talk about that. And that's mainly because censorship as a word has different meanings to different people. And like Vivek just mentioned a while ago, that censorship can change with the power, and power itself defines what that is. And for that reason, we have some idea of what censorship means on Ethereum right now, being able to include transactions or not. But I expect that would change a lot over the next few years. And I also expect that EPVS will also change how we think about it, how we solve it, how we look into it. Rollups have a different aspect. Okay, let's first talk about L2s. Like, what exactly are we trying to do and what exactly exists? So I obviously have a bias here. I like OPStack a lot. I spend quite a bit of my time just experimenting with OPStack, and I have played with others like Orbit and CDK. But yeah, there are actually quite a few different options now that like L2s are popular. So yeah, there are like so many different options, but all of them have the same trust assumptions, the requirements, what people expect from them. Some of them a little bit differently. All of the ZK chains have a different assumptions, but in general, all of the L2s are focused on the same thing, being able to prove the transactions that are happening and being able to have them available for long time. For L2s, when we talk about censorship, we have new problems. We need decentralized sequencing. We need all DAs like Celestia to talk about cost, because it's extremely expensive to put them on Ethereum. And the concept of censoring transactions from L1 to an L2 change completely, because it's possible that L2's sequencer just doesn't include your transaction. So you need a way to be able to include it from the L1 layer in the opposite one. So the concepts change a lot, and over time they also like resolve into similar things that we'll talk about in this particular module as well. And yeah, we are far too early. Zain would probably agree with me that we're way too early in the L2 scape, even the L1 scape, to be honest. But yeah, I'm excited to see what's coming, and that's how we got here in the first place.
Amazing. Amazing. Akshat, if you could really one quick thing. So L2s and rollups, is that exactly the same thing? Do you see them as slightly different?
They're not exactly the same. There are different type of rollups, and some of them are L2s which publish most of their data back to Ethereum. But there are some rollups that don't do that, and they still submit some sort of proofs back to Ethereum, but not all of the data, not the availability part.
Okay. And then on MEV, you brought it up briefly, but your
Yes.
suggestion was that that was basically like a new breaking of the rules, or an unexpected breaking of the rules of the game that Ethereum was. Could you talk more about MEV and what people are trying to do to kind of like mitigate?
Yeah. So it wasn't really breaking of the rules, but rather bending them. The assumption was that gas is always going to be more expensive than anything economically on chain. So the way you would order the transactions is by gas price. As in, if I am paying 200 gas, it must be more important than when paying 199 gas. This kind of changed around like a couple years ago, when people realized, wait, I can pay more, but I can also extract that value in Uniswap pools or back run, front run, all of those things. And people were like, okay, how do I exactly do that? So they started creating this thing where people who are supposed to create blocks, they partner with somebody else to build these blocks in a way where they are able to extract extra value. And that's where MEV comes in, like maximum extractable value. And this kind of changed the game, because gas fees were no longer the highest thing like that you had to like rank based on. Now it was like, how much value can you actually take out of the network in that particular block? How much value can you secure in that particular block? That kind of changes how you look at things. That wasn't a concern like before somebody actually did that. So that's the good example of change makes things happen. So yeah, that's the core aspect of it. And now we're thinking about, okay, what do we do about it? We need builders and proposers to be separate. They can't be the same people, otherwise MEV is going to be a huge problem. My expectation is that even if we implement EPBS, I'm sure somebody will find a way to go around it and make another way into MEV, but we'll see exactly what happens.
Yeah. The nature of, if we talk about scaling principled games, the nature of an infinite game, one of the definitions is that an infinite game is a game where, in order to continue the play, the rules have to continue to change. So I think to that point, there will be a response, and there will be a change, and there will be a response and a change. But it's really good to hear the history, and to your point, like people didn't really expect it, but then it became a thing, and then now there's a response, and that's how the game is changing. Nice. My last question. Oh, sorry. Did you say something? I just didn't mean to cut you off.
All I said was this was a free market.
Free market, yeah. And then I may have missed it. This is for me. I've learned so much, and I think, Madam, thank you for the comment in the chat. If anyone else has questions for Akshat, please post them in the chat. We can come back around to them. Things like Celestia, things that like how do I place them in the framing that you've given us here?
Okay, so when you think about L2s and you think about they have to scale to a lot at a much higher degree than L1s. So cost is a huge factor. If a team like Optimism can make an L2, sure, it makes sense. There are millions of users that use it. But if you think about something like a smaller team, okay, I actually have a great example here because of PGN, because they decided to shut down their L2. And the main reason why that was the thing was because of the cost of actually making PGN run over this amount of time. And because as of right now, nearly 95% of the cost to run a chain is data availability on Ethereum, there has to be other ways to guarantee DA without actually using Ethereum's like the base layer. Blobs are a good part of it, like being able to reduce cost to a certain extent. But there are just some other ways, like Celestia, which makes cost so low that you and I can probably create an L2 in like 5 minutes and be like, I don't care about it for years and years to come. It really costs under $1 a month, I think, to actually keep the DA up on Celestia. And that's a huge aspect of just the cost of being able to run an L2 or an L3 going forward.
Amazing. 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 Akshat, thank you so much. It's such a clear framing that you've given us. And these slides, I think the best part about them is they'll stand the test of time, which is something that we're really hopeful for in kernel, with just how, we want to develop a framework to think about not only where we've gotten to today, but now, if anything new comes up, you can ask yourself, okay, is it for simple decentralization? Is it for scaling? Is it for decentralization and censorship? Is it for validity and verification? Now, we have some good questions in the chat, Akshat. I'm sure we'll come back to you, but I want to introduce Zain momentarily and see Zain basically as an introduction. First of all, Zain, he works at product at Optimism. He's one of the most thoughtful people that I know, and he's a good friend of mine. I've known him since before this crypto story. But I want to see Zain first and foremost, if you have any thoughts, reflections, responses to what Akshat has shared, and just welcome you back to Kernel.
Well, grateful to be back. And Akshat, that was a phenomenal presentation. I loved the fun fact at the beginning related to the gas limit. I didn't even know that. And I chuckled given I think something that we're navigating as an industry, whether integrated or modular scaling, is that there's a lot of complexity up front, right? So it's if you're an application developer, all you care about is transaction speed, transaction costs, security, and going back to Vitalik's roadmap. It's how do we kind of abstract some of that and focus on the value props that developers or end users care about? So really appreciate the overview, and as well as appreciate the love for the OP stack, as well as if anyone does have any feedback on how we can improve, please. We're super receptive to it, and I'll drop my email if anyone has any feedback to share about that. I did want to touch on, I think, whose question was it? Dev's question around the Ethereum scaling roadmap versus other L1s. I actually started my crypto career working on a Solana protocol, so I think I have a slightly different perspective. But I think Dev, at the highest level, they're just two different approaches to scaling, right? I think on the integrated side, you have today, in 2024, February 29th, the integrated solutions, in my opinion, have a very a simpler developer experience, right? However, they do have that trade-off related to number of nodes, perceived decentralization, perceived uptime, etc. And that presents us on the Ethereum side, or people working on Ethereum scaling, an opportunity to really improve the developer experience, right? So Akshat kind of flagged, hey, there's Optimism, there's the ZK stacks, there's Arbitrum. If you're starting out, which one are you going to go to, right? Versus, oh, I'm just going to go deploy on a subnet on Avalanche, or I'm just going to go build on Solana. So it is our job is people working on Ethereum scaling to kind of simplify that and say, hey, at the end of the day, we're all working on the same goal, which is we want to scale this decentralized compute layer. And we need to be able to communicate that in a very simple way to onboard developers more, to get people experimenting with these trustless mechanisms. So I would say today, the difference is not so much censorship resistance, but also developer experience, costs. And a lot of this is going to start changing in less than 2 weeks with the arrival of 4844, which I'm happy to talk about as well. But I think that's my immediate take.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Dave, how did that? Any thoughts or clarifying things you're thinking about there?
Yeah, no, thanks,
I-
Zain. Thanks for the response. And yeah, I feel like what you described shows the sort of complexity of the space of sort of, I think when you mentioned like, you're entering the Ethereum space and like which one do you build on, which L2 do you choose? And I feel like, yeah, thinking about I think Ethereum and thinking about, I think censorship being this module, I was quite keen to see of like how censorship on the Ethereum ecosystem plays out differently than how it might play out in some of the other L1s, as to think about like where, yeah, the advantage of the sort of L1 plus L2 model works. So thanks, that was useful. I think I'm still processing some of that. If I have some follow-ups, I'll share them in the chat.
Yeah, Dave, I'll try to find it. There was an interesting article. And by the way, everything I say does not represent optimism or OP Labs. These are my own personal views. But there's an interesting article around like how decentralization is not a binary, right? So there's a scale to it, right? So it's like things like Bitcoin, yes, extremely decentralized. Things like Ethereum L1, extremely decentralized. But when you start getting into alt L1s, even L2s today, right? It's like, okay, yes, they're more decentralized than something like an AWS instance, but like how much more decentralized do they need to get? A lot more before they are, where like a nation state actor couldn't bring them down or something like that. So I think that's like how we think about it generally, but I think there's, as Akshat mentioned, there's a lot of work, especially on the L2 side around like bringing fault proofs, permissionless fault proofs to mainnet, bringing things like decentralized and shared sequencing online. But the amazing thing, and across all L2s, is they have that decentralized roadmap where it's saying, okay, first we're going to get fault proofs on mainnet, then we're going to get to shared sequencing, then we'll get to decentralized sequencing. So there's a path to eventually get there.
Okay. I want to get back to there's some other really great questions. Obi's question about Obi's question. Let's see, we have Sal on these very practical technical questions. I want to make sure I get one in for Zain and to bring it back to this idea of principled games. The game that we're talking about here, right? The comparison, they're the base layer games of both Ethereum and other L1s that allow for censorship resistance in the way that it's traditionally talked about. What I want to just highlight is that how censorship resistance is used in this post is not only in the way that we talk about at the base layer, but whether there are forms of, let's say, economic resistance, basically different types of incentives that applications built on, whether it's L1 plus L2s or on blockchains, what different affordances do they give an application developer that, doesn't really want to care about any of this, to your point? They want lower transaction costs and they want faster transaction speeds. Once you figure out how you're going to do it, whether it's with the Ethereum plus rollup approach or with a Solana approach, when you provide it to them, the question still remains, okay, why do I build on these things, these blockchains? And one of the suggestions here is it's not just like censorship in like a nation state sense of the word, but it's incentives that are different from the ones that you would have if you didn't build on a blockchain. So one that I want to just bring up, that I don't know, Zain, if you would agree, but I just want to make sure to highlight it. I mean, Retro PGF is a game, another principled game, you could say, that is not a base layer game. It's not built on Ethereum. It doesn't apply to any other L2. It only applies in the OP example. But how this game works is that there's a there's a set of funds that have been set aside in the OP governance stack that have the intention to be allocated on a consistent basis to public goods projects that impact optimism, that are built on top of optimism. They're expanding and changing definitions for what a public good is. There are rounds that are run on a regular basis. Round 1, round 2, and round 3 have been run so far. There will be a round 4. Kernel participated in rounds 2 and 3, and it's been a really meaningful part of the ability for Kernel to continue, and a meaningful part of our game and how our economic incentives have changed as an institution as compared to one, let's say, that would be built on Web 2 foundations. And so, Zain, I just want to like get your thoughts on that type of thing, both at the application layer. You can touch on PGF if it's helpful, but I just want to call attention to the fact that censorship resistance, yes, it's first and foremost a base layer thing where we're trying to achieve very specific goals for the base layers of Ethereum and for the base layer of any protocol. But censorship resistance also has to do with basically like how we get to spend our time, the types of applications and types of things that we get to engage with, how those applications feel, how those product experiences could feel different than, let's say, the ones that require an advertising-based business model to go on. Are there other incentives for the things built on blockchains?
That is a great nuance. So if I understand correctly, right? So 4844 as an example, right, is coming to Ethereum. It's an Ethereum upgrade coming in like 2 weeks, and what that's going to do is lower fees on rollups from, let's say, 10 cents down to our estimates internally are like sub-cent, right? So 0.001. And what Vivek, I think you're alluding to, is saying by dropping fees even further, you're actually able to open up the amount of people, either end users or developers, who previously wouldn't be able to experiment on decentralized compute, and now bring them into the fold, see what trustlessness can they can do. That's actually pretty interesting. So one thing to add, and something we're looking to address here in the next less than a month, is we've noticed it costs around $200. Well, now that Ethereum's pumped, I don't know the exact number. Let's say $300 for a developer to deploy an average application on there. So like say multiple contracts and stuff like that. So for people and we've run this test with developers in the EU and US. But what we saw is like when we show that number to EU and US developers, they're like, they don't really care. It's kind of like almost like pocket change, right? But then when we talk to developers in Africa, in India, it's actually surprising. They're like, yeah, that $200 has been a limitation for us, and like we haven't been able to actually deploy our application to mainnet because of that. So I think that's a great insight around L2s being able to open up Ethereum to more people to play.
Yeah. So there's that, and I totally I appreciate all of that. The question then still continues to be like, what are the types of applications that you're like, this should be built on a blockchain, and are there just like interesting incentive differences that you sense? And this is where the PGF thing continues to come into play for me, because there's something of that game where it says, if we can, and it's not a guarantee by any means, it's kind of like in kernel it would be called a fool's hope, which in this module is considered the only type of hope that really we have is a fool's hope. It comes from a reference to Lord of the Rings, but Frodo has in the Lord of the Rings a fool's hope. And I consider retro PGF in many ways like that. It's a fool's hope. It's like we say we're going to do this. We're going to do this on a regular basis, and it's going to encourage and allow for different types of applications and institutions that otherwise would, let's see, economically maybe they would be viable, but they would have to shift their incentives in a direction that they now don't have to make those choices on. And it's that type of shift that it requires a lot of things. And Zain, I know you're very nuanced on this topic. Like, you know that retro BGF can't last forever unless there's like ample usage of OP stack. But I just continue to want to like nudge on like what censorship resistance allows us as a concept is like different types of things to be built, things that otherwise wouldn't be built. And so it's like, what are those applications? What are the things that you're excited and yeah, that's my last question. I know you have to go pretty soon, so the last 15 minutes will open up to everyone else.
It's a good question. I think, look, I'll go back. I'm very customer focused, and I'll go back to like what are the user problems that people have today, and maybe that's like a less sexy answer, but it's like access to stable coins to me is like a huge undertapped opportunity, right? Especially in Ethereum. So for those that were at DevConnect, if you were like walking around in Turkey, you would see USDT and Tron signs everywhere, right? At money exchanges, right? And the reason being is like if you look at as an example, like the Turkish lira against Bitcoin, you'll see I think that it's like at all-time highs, right? Even though Bitcoin's not at all-time highs yet. The reason I reference that is like people in Turkey, moms, dads, sisters, brothers, like they're all struggling with inflation and they're using Tron and USDT to get access to a relatively more stable currency in the dollar. So I think that aspect of censorship resistance, yes, it's on Tron today. Hopefully over time it moves back to Ethereum. It gives people access to that. The other thing that I think is super exciting for those that like work in social or used to work in social is the experimentation that's happening on Farcaster today. So Farcaster's identity system, Farcaster is a protocol that's like a combination of, you can imagine like Twitter and Reddit. You should follow me and let's chat with Farcaster at Zain. But the cool thing about Farcaster is they launched this feature called Frames, and it allows a developer to kind of experiment with soon on-chain transactions. That's a little alpha, but experiment with like in apps within your feed. Now, the funny thing is that kind of functionality of a developer being able to build an application within a social feed has existed since 2010. Twitter had it, Facebook had it, but you know what Facebook and Twitter did is they learned that those applications actually reduce Twitter's own or Facebook's own revenue, right? Because they could show less ads to end users. And so what they did was they removed the developer API. Now, the beauty of Farcaster and this decentralized social network is that, okay, the client that I'm using today is called Warpcast. If Warpcast wanted to remove that functionality, they could, but then another Akshat could spin up a competing client that allowed that functionality to exist. I could port over my social graph, I could port over my identity and still interact with the applications I want. So I think from my standpoint, again, probably the less sexy answer is access to stable assets across the world, wherever you are, is something I get very excited about, as well as people continuing to enable developers to experiment with things like Farcaster and Lens is something to get very excited about.
It's fantastic. Fantastic answers. The stablecoin one is one I appreciate getting back across the radar because it is increasingly exciting, especially given all of the, like it wasn't as exciting to me 3 years ago because you couldn't see the vision without like sub 10-cent gas fees. But now it feels like it might be below a cent really soon. Okay, Zain, we have 15 minutes with you. Is that right?
Yes. I saw Sal had a question on risks and bridges and L2, L1 to L1 bridging risks and stuff like that. Yeah. Okay. So Sal, the biggest stress in my life right now is liquidity fragmentation. And what I mean by that, right, is like, let's say we want to get to a world where every developer has their own chain, right? There's a lot of complexity before that, but imagine if Sal has his own chain, Vivek has his own chain, and I have my own chain, and you want to swap, let's say, $100 across. Well, there's $20 on Vivek's chain, $20 on Zain's chain, and 60 on yours. Like that's going to be a really bad experience. So the top of mind for everyone in the Ethereum industry, outside of continuing to execute on decentralization, is solving for liquidity fragmentation across all these L2s. So Polygon has, I think, what they're calling their aggregation layer. Optimism has a super chain which enables interop among these L2s. So it is a very, very important thing. And other even third parties like Layer Zero, Hyperlane, and others are working on interop. The reason I mentioned interop and you're asking about bridges is like messaging across all these different blockchains, whether L2s or L1s, is effectively just a bridge, right? So it depends on it depends on like the security. You're making trade-offs on speed, security model, and costs. But generally, you can think about like messaging across these different blockchains. Their primary use case is bridging. So to with that context in mind, to answer your question around risk and scalability, I think like the golden standard, and going back to like liquidity fragmentation, the golden standard is effectively one is, let's say you have 1,000,000 L2s, all of those L2s are using the same bridge. And what that means is those assets that are in, and I'm just focusing on assets today because current use cases, but of course we imagine things beyond assets. But all those assets are fungible across those million of L2s. So it doesn't matter if you're using Vivek chain or Zain chain, your ETH can move seamlessly across that. Now, that talks around the usability of it, and scalability of it, but you're talking about risk. So something very cool with the OP stack is one is open source, which means you can go and fork it. You don't have to pay anything, but there's also a governance approved process of the OP stack. So any upgrade, and even with like 4.844 coming, it goes through a rigorous internal review from the core contributors, including Coinbase, OP Labs, Test and Fraud, which is a team out in Korea, as well as goes through a governance review process. So everyone that's part of, I believe it's the token house today, can review the proposed changes and say, hey, we're going to thumbs up this or we're going to thumbs down it. So there is a potential that even with 4.844 going to reduce fees, don't quote me, but like 50 to 80x, there is a potential that optimism governance could say, hey, actually, we don't want this. So related to the risks, I think at least I can't opine on other L2s, but we have a very rigorous security process that includes traditional smart contract audits, as well as bringing people in the governance process into the review process, as well as it being open source. So there's bug bounties, etc. And then everyone's using one same software version. So you can imagine if there's 100 different versions, you'd have to audit that. There's security problems grow even more. But if you're using the same software version, your surface for attacks continue to draw down. What else are we doing? Well, we have, there's something, if you go to, I think it's dev.optimism.io. Let me just put that in here. There's something called the bridge pause. So if there is a security vulnerability that's detected, chain's part of the super chain. Yeah, thank you. Chain's part of the super chain. It'll automatically be paused to prevent user fund loss. So Sal, I think I hit on bridging issues today, bridging industry today, how we're trying to think about it at Optimism as well as like long-term vision. Did I hit all your questions? And then, by the way, the last thing to mention is like a bridge from L1 to L2 is much different security properties than like an L1 to L1. So
no, you did awesome, Jane. It kind of covered more than what I was looking at. So thank you very much.
Amazing.
Absolutely.
10 minutes left. Francisco or Obi, would either of you like to unmute? Maybe come back to your questions.
Hi everyone. Okay, so I did drop the question on the chat already, but I think I'll extend it further. So while interacting with chains like Linear, which is supposed to be an L2, by the way, I noticed that the gas is it's significantly high. Let me not say relatively, significantly high compared to other L2s like Arbitrum and the rest. So I was wondering, is it due to the tech stack used in building Linear or stuff like that? What could be the reason why their gas is super high compared to other L2s?
Yeah, it's a good question, OB, and then Akshat, I can try and answer this if you want to take a pass also. So what it comes down to is the holy grail of Ethereum scaling is going to be zero knowledge proofs. As someone working at Optimism, I can admit that, and like our strategy includes both for bridging across chains, so interop that we talked about, as well as sending messages across chains. Like we are leaning into zero knowledge proofs because we believe the same way that Vitalik does, that is the way to scale Ethereum. However, the text for zero knowledge proof, Polygon's doing a phenomenal job MetaMask, or excuse me, Consensus is doing a phenomenal job. And ZK Sync's doing a phenomenal job with their products today, as well as Scroll and a few others. What we've learned is that the tech is still maturing. And so the cost to do those zero knowledge proofs, et cetera, that's what shows up. And so a swap, et cetera, on a zero knowledge proof L2 today could be somewhere around $1. But then those optimistic proofs where you don't have the same compute requirements, that's where you're able to benefit from the less than, or soon to be less than 1 cent fees. I do feel absolutely confident, you know, if we play this out 2 years, 3 years from now, that majority of L2s will be using zero knowledge proofs, and that price differential won't be there anymore. But that is the current state of the industry, and also like why we're very early.
Amazing.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And in fact, you can think of it in a slightly like broader context, that different technologies have different requirements and assumptions. Even though everybody is going towards ZK, like Zain said, it's very early and it's extremely expensive, and even more so, the proofs themselves are extremely large, which actually like inflates the cost a lot. So that's the main reason you'll see that even ZK EVM from Polygon or Linear, they have like much higher cost compared to Optimism and Arbitrum, which are both optimistic. So, yeah.
Amazing. Francisco, would you like to share your question?
Yeah, sure. I was muted before. I didn't realize. So the question is about governing. So the L1 of Ethereum is already very challenging to govern between the foundation and the stakers. So making Ethereum dependable on L2s or rollups in general may make it like just too complex, because you have to take note of the decisions that are being made on top of the L1, and now you have several L2s taking their own decisions with different styles and problems. So are we making too much of a mess in terms of complexity?
I love that question. Okay. If you guys are fans of L2beat.com, they're doing a phenomenal job on trying to bring transparency to exactly what Francisco said. So someone using the OP stack, like let's say Zain goes and forks the OP stack, and then I cut out, you know, how the prover works or something like that. Yes, by definition, I'm using a forked version of the OP stack, but the censorship resistance, the security of that is completely different. It's a different product, right? So I think teams like L2Beat are doing a phenomenal job trying to drive transparency there. At Optimism, we have something called the Superchain Registry, which we're actually in the process of refactoring right now to help bring transparency to like the versions and the configs of these underlying chains. But at the end of the day, right, those configs matter to protocol developers. I think what we're trying to do at Optimism, and we'll give a demo if Vivek allows to the kernel team soon. We're launching something called the DApp Developer Console, which kind of abstracts all that complexity away from the developer, the application developer, and says, okay, for kind of going back to I think what we talked around earlier around L2 fragmentation. It says, even if you want to build on L1 Ethereum, we will support you at Optimism. But we just want you to experiment on block space. We will subsidize your cost of deployment. We will give you user feedback. We will help you with testnet funds, whatever it might be, to get you building on the OP stack or even L1 Ethereum, if you so choose. So Francisco, I think like to your point, you're 100% right that in the Ethereum ecosystem right now, and any L2 ecosystem, I know Bitcoins is starting to flourish right now. There's going to be a proliferation of software versions that don't reconcile. On the OP Optimism side, what we're doing to address that is working close with L2Beat to drive awareness, as well as refactoring our Superchain registry to bring awareness to like what are the different config versions, and then at the application developer layer, drive developers towards chains that are using governance approved versions of the software that we feel confident in.
Amazing. Okay. I don't want to do too much more. Akshat, do you have anything while we have Zain? Any like things that have come up? Just last thoughts?
No, I think We have talked about a bunch of things, and all of them were like extremely important. And Zain answered them like nothing, honestly. To that's amazing.
Amazing. Okay, I just have one last thing to share. This is a picture, me, Zain, and our friend Anurag from Big Bend at 7,500 feet last week. If you're ever
That's
in
amazing.
if you're ever running around, if you ever want to take a 8-hour car ride in 2 days to go hike a mountain, Zain's your guy. And both Akshat and Zain, if you are asking any questions about these stories, about like where we are in the technical story of scaling the principled game of Ethereum and blockchains, I think like quite literally, top 250 people in the world, both of them are right here. So just know that they're around and they clearly have a wealth of knowledge that they can share. We'll stay on a little longer, Akshat, if you have a bit longer, but Zain, just thank you for coming, being with us in Kernel.
Yeah, thank you so much for creating this space. I show Kernel every opportunity I have, so was very grateful to get to spend the time with you all today. Cool.
Okay.
Great seeing you again. And Akshat, good seeing you as well. Cheers.
Likewise.
Good deal. Okay. We have a few more minutes as always. I hope that was meaningful. I'd be curious to hear any responses. If not, I could go into some other parts that are kind of the deeper links in the syllabus this week. Take care, so. All right. The one link I definitely want to share, it's the last, it's one of the coolest modules. There's a man named Brett Victor who is really an inspiration to a lot of people in software and technology circles, as well as like architecture circles. He fits a lot with the Christopher Alexander group of people who I would say it's the technology people that are interested in architecture, maybe more than the architecture people. Harry will know better than me on that. But Brett Victor, really like interesting project that he worked on recently was called Dynamic Land. Dynamic Land was a project where it was built in the spirit of Doug Engelbart, who we heard about in Module 3 with Grant, and Xerox PARC. They're inventing a new computational medium where people work together with real objects in the real world, not alone with virtual objects on screens. They were building a computer interface like based on paper, basically. And you could play these games that would have like a computational interface on top of them that were coming down from like the ceiling in these this one's crazy. I don't even know what's going on. But his big thing, we talk about scaling principled games, was inventing on principle. And he suggested that that there was a way of life that most people don't talk about as you approach your career. Some people say follow your passion. Some people say do something you love. Brett Victor's was find and follow a principle. Do something you believe is important and necessary and use that to guide what you do. And his principle was that creators need an immediate connection to what they create. Creators need an immediate connection to what they create, period. And so then that is what Brett used to get to something like Dynamic Land. Prior to Dynamic Land, there's all sorts of really cool projects that he's been working on for a very long time. I want to say, yeah, he worked on Mac, he worked on iOS, he worked at Apple 2017 to 2007 to 2010, and just an interesting character. So wanted to share that. That's one of the deeper links in the syllabus. And another part of the syllabus was on struggle, right? Like learning and like learning's a struggle sometimes. And like when we talk about things like censorship resistance and new economic models and like trying to build interesting economic spaces, it doesn't mean that there isn't like struggle in those environments. And I won't get too far into it right now, but this is one of my favorite pieces of the kernel syllabus. it's quietly tucked away at the bottom of the module. So if you want to read about duende, which is a Spanish word about struggle and the means by which we move through struggle, it's another link that you could get to. Anything anyone wants to share, is thinking about as we get to the end of this fireside? Akshat, thank you. Go ahead, Obi. If you'd like. All right, y'all. Have a good rest of your day. I'm gonna pop into the gather just in case anyone has questions. If you're on the fence about showcase, put your name in the hat. We'd love to have you. We have 18 people signed up, and the breadth of presentations it's going to be slightly different format than Expo, but it should be a lot of fun. I'll stick around if there are any questions. If you have to go, take care. Ovi, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I do have a question. You just brought up something I thought to have asked in the Slack regarding the showcase. So I noticed there are 2 days, the 5th and the 6th of next month for the showcase. And I was wondering if we could actually register for the both slots, or we had to pick just one day like we did during the expo. And then more, could we also present stuff like what we did during the expo? Because I didn't get the opportunity to present my adventure during the expo. Is it going to be acceptable during the showcase?
So yes, it will be. And in terms of days, most likely if you can come for both days, we will assign you one day just to make sure each day is not too overwhelming with presentations. But if there's space, we could imagine you sharing both days. But if you sign up for the times that you know you could come, and then we could assign you, or perhaps maybe we could have you in both days.
All right, great, thanks.
Awesome. Sister, how are you? Greetings, greetings. You're muted if you are talking. Oh, you were back, but now you're muted again.
There. Greetings of love and light and peace and darkness. I'm praying everyone's well. That was so much love and thought and words and inspiration went into today's, well, the background of today's talk. I just wanted to honor that. Also wondering about the showcase. We would like to put in our adventure. I'm not sure. I couldn't see where to do that, so maybe you can show me where to do that.
Yes, the link in the chat, if that helps, I'll also send it to you on Slack just in case it's easier. But all you have to do is RSVP there, and then Sid will send you a message with more. The format is 3-minute presentation in a larger Zoom room like this one, so that everyone can see everyone else's presentations this time, as compared to Expo, split up in the gather. This one will be everybody together.
Okay, and so I know often there's like problems with space and too many people, so there is room that it's okay for us to do a 3-minute on the updates and where we got to it, bringing the blockchain to Lemu.
Yes, 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 yes. We have space. We'd love to have you. We'll pick one. Tell us which day you can make. If you can make both days, we'll assign you to one.
Okay, perfect. All right. Thank you so much for that one. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you. All right, everybody. Take care. See y'all later. Thank you, Obi, for the questions. Bye, Nick. Bye, Adam. Hope to see some of y'all in Denver. Adam, hope to see you in Denver. If you're here, the dinner tonight.
Yep, I'll see you tonight.
Wonderful. See you tonight. Bye,
Thank you.
Fav. Bye, Renato. Of
Bye. Thanks for hosting.
course. Take care. Take care.